Hook the account that decides fate. Every financial crisis tells the same public story. Markets panic. Currencies fall. Governments scramble. Central banks step in. But here's the mystery no official report ever answers. Why do some countries collapse while others are rescued? Why does one nation face austerity, defaults, and social unrest, while another receives unlimited liquidity, bailouts, and global support? The answer isn't GDP. It isn't democracy, and it isn't good policy. It has a silent ledger, an invisible account that determines who survives financial crises and who doesn't. And most people don't even know it exists. Setting the stage, the myth of equal rules. We're taught that the global financial system runs on rules, debt limits, credit ratings, fiscal discipline, independent central banks. On paper, every country plays the same game. In reality, the system has always had tiers. Some nations borrow in their own currency. Others borrow in someone else's. Some central banks can create unlimited liquidity. Others can't. Some debts are treated as safe. Others are treated as dangerous. The difference isn't written into treaties. It lives in history and power, and that's where the silent ledger begins. Origins. When debt first became hierarchical before the modern era. Financial crises were simple. If a kingdom ran out of money, if lenders lost confidence, borrowing stopped. There was no rescue system. That changed in the late 17th and 18th centuries with the rise of sovereign debt markets and early central banks. Countries like England and the Netherlands discovered something crucial. Debt, backed by a credible state, could trade almost like money. Their bonds became trusted liquid. The CWA other nations borrowed, but without that credibility. From the beginning, sovereign debt was not equal. Some debts were anchors. Others were liabilities. That distinction would shape the modern world. The rise of central banks in the hidden hierarchy in the 20th century. Central banks formalized this hierarchy. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system created a global structure. Currencies tied to the US dollar. The dollar tied to gold. The US at the center. This wasn't just about exchange rates. It created a financial pecking order. Countries holding dollars had access to global liquidity. Countries issuing dollars could never run out of them. That advantage never disappeared, even after Bretton Woods collapsed in 1971. When gold convertibility ended, the system didn't reset. It expanded. The dollar remained dominant. U.S. debt became the world's reserve asset, and a silent ledger emerged. Which nations' liabilities were treated as global assets, and which weren't. The mechanism, how the silent ledger works. The silent ledger isn't a document. It's a set of unwritten rules enforced by markets and institutions. Does your debt serve as global collateral? Can your central bank create reserve currency? Will global institutions backstop your bonds? Do investors believe you'll always be rescued? If the answer is yes, crises look different. Your currency may fall, but liquidity arrives. Your banks may fail, but capital flows in. Your debt may explode, but yields stay low. If the answer is no, the opposite happens. Capital flees. Currencies collapse. Debt becomes unpayable. Same crisis. Different outcome. Because the ledger isn't about numbers. It's about trust and positioning. The breaking point, when the ledger becomes visible, the 2008 financial crisis exposed this system. On the surface, it was a global meltdown. In reality, survival depended on where you sat in the hierarchy. The United States, Europe, and Japan expanded balance sheets massively. Their central banks created trillions. Emerging markets couldn't. Some countries faced IMF programs. Others faced austerity. Others defaulted. The crisis wasn't evenly distributed. It followed the silent ledger. The same pattern repeated during the European debt crisis. Greece collapsed. Italy struggled. Germany was protected. Not because of morality, but because of position. Fallout crisis management becomes selection. After 2008, central banks became permanent crisis managers. Swap lines between central banks became lifelines. Access to liquidity determined survival. During the pandemic, this became undeniable. The Federal Reserve opened dollar swap lines to select countries. Others were excluded. That decision alone determined currency stability for entire regions. The silent ledger made choices without votes, without debate, and the gap widened. Countries with access borrowed more. Countries without paid higher prices. Debt levels stopped being equal indicators. What mattered was who could roll debt indefinitely. Failed fixes. Why reforms never touch the core. Reforms always focus on surface issues. Better regulation, debt restructuring, transparency. But none of these change the hierarchy. The silent ledger isn't broken. It's working as designed. It rewards reserve issuers, punishes dependency, and enforces discipline asymmetrically. Even calls for a multipolar currency system don't eliminate the ledger. They just rearrange it. Someone is always inside. Someone is always outside. Modern parallels the pattern is accelerating today. Global debt exceeds $300 trillion. A handful of currencies dominate reserves. Central bank coordination determines market stability. Crises spread faster, but rescues remain selective. We see the same pattern. SOC. Liquidity differentiation, divergence. The silent ledger grows more powerful with every crisis. Because once survival depends on access, dependence becomes permanent. Conclusion: what this really means. 3 takeaways. First, financial crises don't affect nations. Equally, survival is pre-decided. Second, the silent ledger is about trust, power, and position, not fiscal virtue. Third, every crisis strengthens the hierarchy instead of eliminating it. A warning: the danger isn't another crisis. It's a system where crises select winners and losers automatically, without accountability. When survival depends on invisible rules, sovereignty becomes conditional. An open thought: if financial survival is decided by a silent ledger, who controls it? And what happens when too many nations realize they're not listed on the right side? If you want more deep dives into money, debt, and the hidden systems that shape global power, subscribe, because the most important decisions in finance are made quietly, long before the crisis begins.